Wednesday, April 17th. I'm Aaron of Sigbeard. You are at the K8s Infra working group.
Are we recording?
I pressed the record button just when he was doing the welcoming stuff.
And Tim is helping demonstrate how we adhere to the Kubernetes code of conduct by raising his hand and not being a jerk, which is basically what our code of conduct boils down to. And you can all watch Tim do that later on YouTube because we are being publicly recorded, as Tim so nicely confirmed for us. I believe I recognize I believe I recognize everybody here. So I'm going to move past welcoming new members and attendees. I'm going to go straight to action item review, but unfortunately I don't have any action items directly in front of me. Does anybody have anything they specifically want to speak to, or would you recommend I go down last week's notes and pick some stuff out?
I think starting with last week is good. I think that'll bring a few items to the front and let people who didn't do a whole lot of prep get prepped.
Okay. Well, let's just review last week's action items. So on billing and granularity, let's see, Justin, Tim, and Dims, all of your names are on things related to billing. Let's start with the usual question. What are our bills this meeting?
All right.
How much money have we spent?
I prepped by loading that up a few minutes ago. So in the 2 weeks since we have met last, we have spent $85 on VMs. That's the test clusters, which need to be finalized. $85 on compute, $42 on RAM, and $31 on SSD PD, and those are the VM-based charges. $20 on DNS, which comprises 49,920,000 queries in the last 2 weeks. So we're trending about 100 million queries a month. And some other smaller charges for load balancing and PD capacity, and the DNS zone cost us 38 cents, and interzone egress cost us 5 cents. And that's it. So the total is, I don't have a total here. That's looking at somewhere around $140.
Okay. There was discussion around storage last week with Justin's name on it. I don't feel like I heard you talk about storage.
That is on me. We don't yet have any storage. I have a future update, which is more positive, but on this I have done nothing. We don't actually have any storage bills of substance yet to analyze.
Okay.
I am working on creating those bills.
And so I apologize for asking probably the same question I ask every time. I feel like I want to live in a world where we understand with each piece of infrastructure that we add to this effort, we understand how much that piece of infrastructure is costing us. Is that an unrealistic expectation?
No, it is not. And part of the, I would say, the gates for getting the cluster turned on for real is enabling the billing breakdown, which will give us a namespace by namespace view of what's happening. Right now, the bill that I'm reading out here is just the default GCP billing report. It is not a further breakdown. We have the data in BigQuery ready to be analyzed in Data Studio, which someone I won't name says is really easy, and he named himself, that we just need to do. Like, honestly, it's really a matter of somebody needs to sit down and produce a dashboard that shows us the things that we want to see, or at least understand what it is possible to see, and then like get a discussion going with the group of what are the questions we want to answer.
Okay. The reason I feel silly for asking this question is, to me, it goes to other questions that maybe you all have answered already, which is, are we considering doing different GCP projects to help us shard this level of billing? And are we considering one cluster for all of our infrastructure, or are we considering different clusters for different pieces of infrastructure?
I don't think we have a hard answer yet. I would like to have the smallest number of clusters possible and to lean on namespaces and RBAC and all the cool integrations that are possible as much as we can. We will need multiple clusters if and when we want to move into multiple regions, obviously. We don't need to start there. We're not there today. Like the redirector, for example, only runs in the US. And that seems to be fine, but eventually we'll want to move it to multiple regions if for no other reason than availability. So yes, but I would like to limit it. I don't want to spin up a different cluster for every effort.
Okay. Yeah, I largely agree with that. There's also a part of me that feels like compute is going to be dwarfed by, well, compute for infrastructure will be dwarfed by compute for test jobs whenever we get to that section. And that how we manage our clusters has nothing to do with how we manage the artifacts that we're generating and storing on behalf of sundry SIGs and sub-projects, assuming we are heading into that world.
Right, and also GCR, like we're on the cusp of being able to start the trickle flow into the new GCR, and that will be a huge billing item that will dwarf everything else.
Okay, so then document the requirement for spending CNCF money is a thing that DIMS promises to do this week, is the notes from last time.
You're mute, DIMS.
And I'm so sorry I had to say that out loud.
No, that's fair. So just before the call, I went looking for my action items, and I have like 2 sentences that I came up with, and not more. So it reads like this. The various projects in Kubernetes and Kubernetes 6 GitHub produce artifacts, including release binaries, container images, etc. A working group will help figure out choices, options for supporting the creation and dissemination of these artifacts. Does that cover what we want to say, or do we need to say more? This is almost like a mission statement. We don't have one, so I thought maybe this is where we would start.
I think that's fair. So to me, it's the decision tree is like people try to convince us, and if we can't decide, we then escalate to steering, I guess.
Right.
I hate to put steering so immediately in the path of escalation there. And when I say we decide, is it just a majority vote, everybody at the meeting, super majority vote? Are there certain people who are more stakeholdery than other people?
So far, we don't have a lot of drive-by contribution where people show up and are not regular. So I would say we should update the owners files with the list of people who are regular here, and then use that as the people who have the binding votes.
Okay. I'm fair that if you have showed any scheme. Yeah, I mean, I can brainstorm some anti-patterns down the line where like everybody shows up wanting us to pay to host their artifacts, and the system could be gamed, but I also feel okay saying we're just going to have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
To be reasonable. And if you would like, I can take this case-by-case suggestion up to steering to let them like fully delegate that to us or something. I don't know. Your call.
I would say even we do have somebody who can stop us from using this money, which is EHOR, right? EHOR can vote and say, no, we are not going to do this. Doesn't matter if everybody on the call likes it. So he does have that authority, I think, just because he's the CNCF representative.
Okay. That sounds legit to me.
So we already have like 2 layers here. The people who are usually on the call, plus then we have EHOR, and then we go to steering, I guess.
Right. And yeah, you and I think since we are on steering at the moment anyway,
Yeah.
provide that extra layer. Okay, cool. Those are all of the action items that I saw related to billing and reviewing. So let's just think about what action items related to billing we should do for next week. Sounds like, Justin, you still have some, or mysterious person who raised their hand when Tim was not trying to name your name. Sounds like you still have some work to do around billing for storage, or you said you had some good news to share.
Around generating bidding, I will work on doing a Data Studio presentation with fancy infographics and lots of Comic Sans for next time.
Okay. And DIMS, I think if we can put that decision-making process in our charter, I guess. Does anybody?
A quick question about that.
Okay.
Like, that sounds like that works as far as an interim, but I'm wondering what we're going to do in the eventual future when the working group closes down, because working groups are temporary. Like, just something like a back of the mind question to think about, like what does future state of that look like down the road?
Agree. Yeah.
Good point. That's where the CNCF thing comes in, right? We expect, hopefully, that we will have some of these things in place where people from CNCF can take over and keep things running. But then we don't know that.
We like to say that SIGs own code and working groups don't. We have code already in the K8s.io repo. We have scripts and we have YAMLs and we have DNS config. Like, I don't know if at some point we promote to a SIG or we change the rules around perpetuity of working groups.
I don't think we're at the point where we need to answer that question just yet. It could be we turn into a SIG. I also feel like you could make the case that each of these pieces of code actually belong to different SIGs and whatnot. And much in the same way as the steering committee has ultimately delegated their authority to individual SIGs for things, we're kind of like by proxy figuring out where all of the things go and kind of de facto making decisions on what seems worthwhile to spend the project's money on. And then once we've done that initial pass, it could be that steering kind of makes the decisions for new things or changing things, and the existing owners operate with the momentum that they have. It's totally a valid question though, Christoph. Okay.
One more thing here, right? I think the first mission for us is how do we get things out of the Google owned stuff to CNCF owned stuff? And that would be like the first thing that we should do, and not trying to go around find where all we can spend money, right?
Yes.
So that would be like a different, lesser priority category, I would say.
Agree. Hopefully the steady state for this is steady and not ever increasing. Although I think it probably will trend up over time, hopefully just with a very low slope.
And the other part here is we already have like an escape mechanism for getting people to talk to CNCF by when we said that in the steering, we said that we'll figure out if it's less than X number of dollars, people can do service desk tickets and talk directly with CNCF. So there is one more mechanism there already.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. There's nothing else to talk about on billing. If y'all don't mind, I'd like to make an executive decision to jump to CNCF clusters as the next thing to talk about. So looking at what we talked about last week, we talked about burn down and create cluster using automation. Where are we on that?
So I'll admit that I have had zero time for it in the last 2 weeks with GCP Next. I was just burned. So it's not where I wanted it to be. I really wanted to have us having a demonstration of a script this week, but I wasn't able to press on it. And I know Justin was at Next too. So
Yes, on this I was also unable, although I did unhelpfully create a massive bike shed fest on automation. So it's not necessarily on clusters, but maybe we can figure it out on buckets and then apply the learnings of the bike shedding to how we manage clusters. Because I would like us to have one way to manage the things, whether that ends up being Bash, Go, or Perl.
you're trying to go over my head, Justin.
Not at all. I'm saying we should figure it out and agree that Perl is the only one we can all be unhappy with.
Bash.
No.
Okay,
Go.
that's it. We're all using Haskell. End of story. I'm not sure I see this bike shed fest in other places. That seems like a useful thing to move to shortly. Do you have a link for us?
Yes, it is under the Artifactory broad topic, which has now been narrowed, but I will put a link to the PRs into the, I guess, today's.
Okay, but so just to summarize the state of the state, we created a cluster when this group was first incepted. Has that cluster been burned down?
I don't believe so. We have created a second cluster. I have yet to actually pull the trigger on burning down and I think I've moved the workloads, but I have yet to actually pull the trigger on burning down that first one.
Okay.
So Justin, maybe in the next 2 weeks, we can partner up for a day or half a day and actually focus on trying to get this over the finish line with respect to automation and access control. So we can like test it with one of these staging team groups style stuff with the Google groups and RBAC and everything else.
I think that sounds like a great idea. I will sync up with you on when I am there. We could do Tuesday week, but that is like last minute. We could also do it remotely.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, you don't have to be here to do that. But for me, the Friday mornings tend to be great. I can put aside like the entirety of the Friday morning and even into the afternoon. And that's been pretty successful at getting a big block of time to get things like this over the finish line. Just not this Friday.
If somebody else wanted to shoulder surf or participate, would they be able to help you two out?
Yes.
I was thinking of Hippie who's raising his hand, but
yes, particularly if they prefer Go to Bash so that I can have another vote in my corner.
okay.
Don't mischaracterize my position, Justin. It's not that I prefer Bash to Go.
So, and you mentioned words like RBAC and Google groups and stuff. So RBAC, is this related to, there had been discussion of like scraping and auditing all of our IAM policies, or does this fall under that?
Ippy, you want to give an update on that?
We cannot hear you, Hippie. For whatever reason, Zoom doesn't show you as muted, but yeah, still can't hear you, unfortunately. Well,
there's nothing muted.
yes, all right, we can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Yeah, we have the scripts in place for pulling and dumping. I don't have a cron job set up, so I figured I wasn't sure how to integrate it into a pro job probably with the right credentials within our cluster, and it would be nice to work with someone on automating that if that's the correct way to move.
I think that's a great thing that we should do. Like as soon as we get a cluster up, we should have this as one of the very first things that we run in that cluster as a proof of being able to get RBACs and access control and linking all the pieces together, because we've been very careful at curating a group that has just the permissions it needs to be able to audit and dump IAM stuff. And so getting a job running in the cluster with those credentials, I think will be a good demonstration.
Yes. To be clear, Tim used the word job, Hippie used the word prow job. I feel like job, like a Kubernetes job resource, would be the better thing to start with before setting up prow and then getting prow jobs and whatnot running.
I mean, we have plain old Kubernetes cron jobs, right? We don't have to have prow.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. I feel like we should start with cron jobs.
Agree. I mean, the first thing is just run once to completion job demonstration. And then if we are happy with the result of that, then we can run that daily via cron job. Or via bash that says sleep 24 hours.
Okay. And mostly since Christoph is here and I've heard him express opinions about the use of G Suite and its wonderful APIs for management of groups, where are we on the use of G Suite versus the use of public Google groups for permissions? Do we feel like we have to have this locked down before we can like really move forward? So first, where are we on the use of the things? We are using public Google groups today, is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Other than the ones that I'm aware of right now is we have the DNS ones and we have the bucket ones for images. Is there anything else that we have today?
No, but that list is growing as the GCR stuff gets more done. I expect the 3 that we used for the GCR GCS staging to grow into 30 pretty quickly.
So, and as far as like outside of those groups, who has permissions to stuff? Is it just you, Tim?
Outside of the groups, there's a small set of people, including Ihor, myself, Taylor from Linux Foundation, and a couple other people, I think maybe DIMS, that like it's literally order 5 people who have blanket org level access.
Okay. What I would like to propose, and I will volunteer to take this on if I can poke the right people for the information, is step 1, documenting what we have today, like what is the state of the world, who are the people who have that like root top level permission, what groups we have today, and what our kind of policy is around group formation. What I would like to do, like I don't want to block any other pieces or any other work on this, but I would like to look at what we could do as far as automation is concerned. So like automating, generating those groups, automating getting people into those groups, preferably a GitOps model, same as we've done for everything else, so that we have kind of a tie back loop between visibility and auditability and all that kind of stuff as far as how those things are generated. I think API-wise, we might need to go with G Suite for that, because I don't think we could do that in the public Google groups. So we might need to transition things over from the public Google groups that we have to G Suite groups. But I can, if everybody's okay with that, I can start poking at that.
I think you're right. That was what I was raising my hand to say too, is like, I don't think we can do half of what you want to do against the public Google groups. I don't know of any command line or API way to create groups or to introspect groups or to ensure the correct settings of groups. The way the like ensure staging repo scripts and stuff are put together right now is it's nice that I can, if I'm not confident in the current config, I can just rerun it and it'll be idempotent and it'll reset everything the way it's supposed to be. That's a pain for those Google groups. I don't know that they're all consistent. In fact, I know that they're not all consistent in terms of who has ownership. Yeah, so having an API to that is, I think would be great, but I think we have to move into the G Suite to do that. And so the only question is, at some point back when I was on steering, we didn't want to do that. If that general sentiment has changed or shifted in this regard, then I'm all on board with it. And I will help adapt the scripts to use new group names instead of the old group names.
First off, I'm happy to check back in with Brandon and Michelle, who I feel like are looking at a G Suite proposal from SIG Contribex to understand what we can do there. I have heard things informally through the grapevine, like there are people at G Suite who are horrified that we're not like taking full advantage of the G Suite because theoretically we are a public open source / educational project and we could have up to 1,000 users, or I don't know. So feels like this is in our wheelhouse, but so as not to block on that, just so I'm clear, I think the dumping of all of the things that you, Tim, and Hippie have been working on is like half of this equation, right? It helps us at least document all of the people and groups and what things they have access to today, even if we can't automatically change things from that.
So who is the ultimate decider, or what is the process to get the decision of whether we are or are not going to switch to the Kubernetes G Suite? Or is that already decided?
Steering, I think.
I guess it is steering. And at the moment, I'm trusting it more as Brandon and Michelle as representatives that interface between steering and CNCF, because conceivably this could involve paying more money. And so that would be getting the CNCF to pay more money.
Right. It shouldn't. I mean, my understanding is that groups are not a charged resource in G Suite. So we can create groups to our heart's content. What we need, though, is either a self-service way of doing this or somebody who's willing to sign up to field our tickets.
Right.
What I can volunteer to do is number one, write down the list of questions to get us the current state of the world. And probably most of them will be directed at you, Tim. But I'll write down the list of questions, get answers, then get them documented. Number two, I can research the APIs and make sure that the APIs that are there for G Suite will do what we want them to do, so that like we have a case for, hey, we actually want to move to the G Suite and here are the reasons why. And then once I have that, then I can either bring that back to this group, or I can just submit that directly to steering and say like, hey, the infra working group wants to move into G Suite with these features for this reason. And just kind of keep that ball rolling. I don't know, I can't commit at this point to the actual coding of the stuff to do the syncing, but I can at least document the policies and keep the ball rolling on that one.
If we can get approval that we're going to do this and we can figure out what the access requirements are, I don't want to be, one of two people who's fielding all the tickets for all of the G Suite group create requests in perpetuity. But if that's where we start, I guess I'm okay with that. I'm happy to script myself out of a job too in Bash.
Okay. Just trying to move us forward and just ignore that comment about Bash entirely. So I feel like we are saying we want to come to a yes/no decision on the use of G Suite, and that is part of the things we have to solve before we open up the gates. I feel like everything we've talked about, I've been trying to get us to reason about what do we have to do before we're saying okay, we're kind of open for business and can accept more help and talk about moving more infrastructure to clusters and whatnot. And it's largely getting our billing right. And we have AIs for what to do there. And then it's definitely burning down the first cluster, getting our heads together to maybe work on a script to create a cluster to prove to ourselves that works, and to feel like we have a documented plan for whether or not we're documentation on what the state of today is from a set of IAM policies, who has the keys to what, which Google groups or people have the keys to what, and then how could we use G Suite to make that management more effective. Have I left anything out of critical path there?
The image promotion stuff from Linus.
Okay, I did want to get back to the image promotion stuff, but I'm just trying to make sure, to me, I keep coming to these meetings and I feel like we're still not at the point where I can say okay, everybody start, let's start planning the infrastructure to move over. So to me, I want to see us get progress on all of those things soon. Okay, so is there anything else to say? Yes.
On the topic, I agree with your list by and large. I think we're ready, at least in some fronts, obviously DNS is live, right? There's nothing in the way there. And if the G Suite decision comes down today, we could start, not this week, next week, on switching it over to the new group. And honestly, I owe a script in that space anyway. So nothing's blocking that. The cluster is not blocking that work. the cluster is the next most obvious step in parallel with the GCR stuff. Yes.
Right. Right. The one more thing I would say there is the cluster, whatever we wanted it to run in the cluster is already running there. So it's not like we're stopping people from running things there.
But it's not really well scripted, and it's not establishing the best practices that I think we want to follow for, open for business territory.
Agreed. But nobody's come up and with a request which we are saying, no, we can't let you in right now. So,
right. Well,
that's terrifying, actually. I feel like we should not be letting more than 1 or 2 things in there, and only those are even special, because I'm not comfortable yet with the way the clusters are set up, just because I haven't had a chance to look at it and I haven't seen it scripted or coded anywhere.
I personally could think of all sorts of things that are running on clusters around here that I don't want to run on clusters around here anymore. I just haven't asked yet. So I want to get to there. So just whoever is taking notes, if we can put down an action item for me, if this is okay with everybody, like, I feel super uncomfortable surfing a doc and us having an organic discussion. It's great that we're all knowledgeable enough to kind of riff on this, but I also have a tough time keeping track of what we did last time, what we're planning to do, and how much of it is left to do. So I want to turn all of this stuff into GitHub issues. So instead of reviewing action items, I can review GitHub issues either in a milestone or on a project board. I feel like there are other SIGs or groups out there who have sort of tightened up their policies there. I'm happy to get us started on that path. I don't know that I can necessarily be your bosun long-term, but I feel like we kind of need a little bit more structure than walking through Google Docs. It's just my thoughts.
Yes, so DIMS opened a bunch of issues a while back. Some were sort of umbrella-ish and some were actually pretty specific. In the original doc for this group, we had a list of 40 things that we wanted to move into community-owned space. Do we have it? Did we open issues for every single one of those things? And are we sure that nobody's edited that list? Maybe me.
I'm not sure. So maybe I'm signing up to eventually solve that. But I think based on what I just talked about, what I want to solve most immediately is to put together a milestone for opening the gates, as it were. To figure out what are all of the things that on the critical path we feel we need to solve before we can get to the rest of that list. But like we talked earlier about how we want to make sure we prioritize our funding for moving existing infrastructure out rather than adding a whole bunch of new stuff. And I feel like that's where we need to express this stuff in milestones, whatever. So I'll take an AI to take a swag at that, and we can review that 2 weeks from now. I will even ping the channel.
Thank you for reminding us of that priority too, because that's exactly right.
Okay, so let's go back up to talk about the image promoter. So Tim and Linus, your names are on this. How are we doing?
I think we're basically ready to see it run for reals. I made an update on the umbrella issue yesterday. So there are some remaining items like backups, garbage collection, that kind of thing, but they're not blockers. So as soon as somebody makes a PR against Kubernetes/K8s.io for one of those 3 that we track currently, it should start to work. For what it's worth, the post ran successfully. So if you go on test grid, you'll see one little green box, although it's empty images, right? There's no images in any of those manifests because, as Tim knows, we cleared those out to just start off from a clean slate. So yeah, somebody needs to make a PR, and then we'll just see the whole thing work.
I wish I had thought about it this morning. I would have prepped, and we could have done it live. Let's put that on the definite agenda, committed for next week to do a real demonstration, and we can talk about the details of exactly what's left before we're happy to move the entirety of the existing repo over. Is that fair, Linus?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Cool. And then if that's true, then we can go open for business relatively soon. And that list of staging repos will grow from 3 to God knows how many.
Sure.
Okay. So given all that we just talked about with regard to Google groups and stuff, do we want to say we're not going to actually go from 3 to God knows how many until we've solved all of those other things?
I thought I was just playing chicken with Christoph.
Hit the chicken.
I'm gonna get that one done, so at least we have direction wise for net new. Like, again, I don't want one piece to necessarily block another, but scaling like 10x, yeah, we probably should have something automated to manage that.
Ping me as needed.
Okay, so I got distracted and was reading other things while you two were talking. I apologize. So are we at the point where we could demo this in front of people? Would it be a demo?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, but we didn't do our homework, so we could either do it live right now and try to push something to one of these repos, or we could just push it off to 2 weeks from now and do the live demo.
So I'm totally fine pushing it off 2 weeks from now. And are we saying we don't want to open up for business for another 2 weeks?
I mean, technically it is open for business as we speak,
right.
Because if anybody pushes an image there and makes a PR against, it'll just run right now. So,
it should work right now. We are lacking some things that I think we want before we go open for business, like an automated way of creating groups to enable new staging repos and confidence in the testing. We have no real metrics about what we're doing. And lastly, the new prod repo doesn't have a special name. So like nobody's going to use it. So it's not really open for business until we're ready to throw the switch and flip K8s.gcr.io over to this new repo. In my mind, that's the open for business moment.
Agreed.
Okay.
So demo in 2 weeks, committed. We're not going to mess it up this time, right, Linus?
Yeah, right.
Okay. I mean, just as a thought thrown out there, I feel like Linus has been doing this somewhat under the purview of the release engineering subproject of SIG Release. SIG Release has a meeting next week, Tuesday the 23rd, just to like show them that it works. But if you feel like it's not worth demoing this until we have all our ducks in a row, we can wait.
No, I think we can totally do the demo. I don't think that we need to block the demo. If you want to do it for SIG Release, that's totally fine too. You can just record it and show it here, or we can just do it again. Since it's at the demo stage, we can blow everything away and start over from a demonstration point of view. I think that's fine.
Okay, cool.
I should demo this next week, then.
Yeah, let's get you on the SIG Release agenda. Okay, is there anything else we need to talk about for image promoter stuff?
Bart, do you have any comments, or I just noticed you on this meeting?
I don't. Yeah, I still like can help and doing like code reviews to Linus, doing some small tasks. But if there is something which I can help you with without having like still any access to anything, I would appreciate to tell me. I have time and can help.
Okay, we can chat more offline also. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, cool. Okay, just surfing down the list from last week, Artifactory is the next thing that we talked about 2 weeks ago. And Justin's name was all over this. So Tim, your hand is raised.
Can I suggest we not use the term Artifactory, as it is in fact a copyright?
It is a branded product, and I don't think that's actually what we're talking about. So what are we talking about, Justin?
The artist formerly known as Artifactory. We have boiled that down to, at the moment, a set of GCS buckets fronted by a load balancer. This is for serving non-image artifacts, so binaries. There are some PRs open which examine different ways to create those in moving towards GitOps style. I have opened the language Holy Wars and beginning to regret it, but now have dug in. We could, I think Tim and I are probably likely to figure out our differences and settle on the one true language of Haskell to make everyone happy. and then
Rust, do Rust.
or Rust.
Wait, somebody say Haskell? What?
We will probably decide whether it will be Bash or Go, or both, or neither. But if we can get those merged, then we should get to a point where we are able to have staging buckets in GCS created via the sort of, well, currently the as it stands today, adding to the GCR script to extend it to also create a GCS bucket for every project for which we create a GCR bucket. That's the Bash side. And then having a GCLB in front of a prod bucket. That is the Go side. And some form of promoter process, TBD, hopefully will mirror Linus's image promoter, or the image promoter. I don't know who else works on it, but Linus's image promoter.
And to achieve this, we may want to actually rename some of the scripts and repos and
groups, possibly, right?
Groups that we've already created. So honestly, if we're going to go to a new groups process, let's just wait to do that and then rename it in that transition.
Right, because some of the groups, for context, include the name GCR, I think. Which is,
and I don't think we need to have two groups for managing roughly the same thing.
Exactly.
So all of the things you talked about is, there's a link in here that goes to a kept around artifact serving proposal for milestone 0. Is that what you were referring to for people who want to know more?
This is milestone 0 for, yes, the artifact thing.
Okay, and you talked about Bash and Go and other languages. Where does this code live that people could take a look at?
There are 2 PRs. I did link them at the bottom of the docs. They are, I think, 222 and 223. The 222 is the Bash side, and I think Tim suggested, and I agree, that I should merge that into the GCR script, which makes sense. There's some that just needs to happen. The Go side, I think there's some, I don't know if people can still hear me, but there's
Yes, I can. I don't know who stopped everybody's video.
Okay.
I can't seem to do that. But.
Well, I will. I don't know what
was
happening.
me. I thought I was switching it off just for myself. Sorry about that.
Well, the 223 is the Go configuration, which I personally believe has advantages, but I think Tim rightly raises the point that do we want to be maintaining or owning Go code?
Okay. Hey, we're all back. I still can't start my, how can Hippie start his video? This is ridiculous. Anyway, okay, so are we saying we do actually have a Go versus Bash holy war that we need to sort out somehow?
The question is really, we've got a bunch of scripts for creating staging repos that are literally Bash scripts that call gcloud, and there's a little bit of like test if this thing exists, and if not, create it, and if so, set it logic, because gcloud doesn't have the sort of declarative semantics that we want. But then it's not terrible. And we've got these scripts. Now, Justin maybe different reasonable minds can disagree on what's terrible and what's not. There's a shell library, so we're entering terrible territory. I haven't yet passed an array to a function, although I wish I could. So the question then is, for creating something like a cloud load balancer, which is significantly more complicated than creating a GCS bucket in terms of gcloud commands, is it worthwhile to start thinking about a declarative way of doing this, as in writing it in Go so that we can control the semantics a little bit more closely? It's still going to end up writing the same test if it exists, if it doesn't, create it, and if it does, set it logic. But now it'll be in Go, which to some sense is easier to customize, and in other sense is much harder to review, right?
I would also hope that the Go code ends up being more reusable for future things. That's more what I'm thinking about, because honestly, like, I could have written that in Bash, like the functionality that is there today. I could have just as easily written in Bash, and it would be a comparable number of lines, possibly less even, but you know. But it's more like the future, like maintenance, like richer reconciliation, auditing functionality, hopefully using the same code. And maybe this ends up being something that is used by other projects, whereas my feeling is a bash script tends to be very special purpose.
And to be fair, there is a large amount of code that already exists in the Google Cloud Provider that is sort of auto-generated from SDK that we can perhaps lean on for these things too. So that's the discussion. I obviously have a slant because I wrote all the original shell scripts. And I'm not keen to rewrite them.
If that is your objection, I will happily rewrite them.
Sorry, Christoph?
Is there a thought around using a third-party tool, something like Terraform or something that can provision the infrastructure pieces that with code that we don't need to write and maintain?
I gave it 10 seconds worth of thought and then wrote the shell script because I knew how to do that.
We absolutely could do Terraform. We are implementing the functionality of Terraform here without.
When I heard declarative, I immediately thought Terraform.
Okay. Well, I always like to approach things from the let's like ship and iterate perspective. So I'm honestly fine with Bash and it being special purpose, and then us deciding, wait, this is terrible to maintain, let's move it forward. But I understand the fallacy of like once it lands and once it's actually used, it's so much more annoying and painful to actually change it. And maybe there's value in getting it right. But like to me, if it works, great.
Could we try both though? Like, could we have Bash for the buckets and Go for the load balancer?
And what is this? Like you rock, paper, scissors to decide the loser reconciliates and rewrites the thing in the language that we...
The rock versus the paper, and we see which one survives the rain. Yes, and we can all agree, we can all disagree on which one is the rock and which one is the paper.
We should take it to the PR probably and look at it. Because independent of the details of it, it's a little too abstract.
Right, and like, yeah, the mention of Terraform may also be just as valid. I've had some great and some not so great experiences with Terraform. So we all bring whatever baggage we have to these language decisions. To me, like I said, my priority is shipping. Right now, I feel like this group could use some shipping wins and some momentum and stuff, but I do deeply care about maintenance and maintainability. And I do believe that everything is written in Bash is not the best way to attract new contributors. See the cluster directory in Kubernetes or the hack directory. Okay. I'm not even sure what to recap on the artifact serving. It feels like you articulated a milestone 0 very well. You are moving forward. We're going to have some holy wars on some PRs, and we will will we have shipped anything in 2 weeks?
We'll be able to get the buckets running, because I think actually we're agreed that, well, if we can unblock the groups, okay. Honestly, it seems less likely, which is disappointing.
Okay.
We can use the same groups, like okay, even if they have a name that sort of doesn't make sense, we can use the same group for now on the assumption that we will either rename it publicly or rename it into our G Suite.
Okay, that works. That works for me. So yes, if we have that, then yes, we can get the buckets working. Possibly and then we can wage the holy war on the load balancer.
Okay. The last thing that I see here, see from last week's action items that we haven't talked about this week is Netlify. Is anybody here able to speak to Netlify? Okay, I don't think so. We don't have an owner. So the decision was to table this until we have an owner, and I think there was some discussion at SIGDocs. I can follow up to see where that is at. I believe this was largely
there was some.
Go ahead.
there was a discussion on an issue that I kind of weighed in on, because there was at least for part of the Netlify connecting thing, there was a need for GitHub owners to be involved, to connect the Netlify with, like, basically there's a couple steps that need to be done, that you need both admin on a repo and admin in Netlify. So I know SIGDocs was talking about that, and like how we can connect that piece and have like a documented process for delegating out Netlify projects to repos. So I provided them some information. I'll grab the PR so we can toss it in the meeting minutes and stuff. But yeah, that's still on SIGDocs right now, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Those are all of the things that I'm aware of from the Google Doc. I feel like that also covered everything that we have in the in progress column of our project board. Is there anything else we want to talk about? Or would you rather do something different for 7 minutes? Oh, yeah, the URL shortener thing.
Michael, do you have an update on that, or do you want to talk about
it? Give me a minute and I will talk about it. I'm still in traffic.
I can start if you want. So we had a long-standing open to-do of moving the go.k8s.io URL shortening out of the Nginx config and into something that was actually designed to do this. And that didn't require editing the Nginx config and restarting the Nginx servers every time. We wanted to add a Go URL. So Jonathan proposed Schlink, and Michael came back with, there's this other thing that is even simpler called Text Direct, which looks to be okay to me. There's an open source version, we can run it ourselves, set up our own monitoring. It's going to meet the same bar that everything else that wants to run in the cluster is going to have to meet. You know, convince us that it's alive and has health checks, etc. It uses text records in DNS instead of a database. So submitting a new Go link is effectively editing the DNS config and having somebody who's got DNS push access to push it, which seems a little fraught. But I think we can delegate the entire subzone of go.k8s.io so that when we push those updates, we'll only be pushing updates to Go and not to the rest of the DNS space, I think. So I think that's the part that I'd like to see us prove out.
So you're reminding me offhand. So a human is still in the path of updating DNS. What would it take for it to be like an automatically reconciled thing, same way we do for GitHub teams and stuff?
A place to run it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, cool.
Either, I mean, we could run it like the image promoter is and run it as a Prow plugin somewhere, and then we have to argue about where Prow runs and et cetera, and who's got access to that. Or we could literally run it in a shell loop that runs in a cluster somewhere that just watches Git, and when the Git changes, it updates. Like that, I know how to do. That's trivial. We just need a cluster to do it. So we've got a bit of a cyclical dependency, but I would put that in the first 10 things that I would want to run in the cluster. I don't want a human to be doing it anymore. And actually, the script at this point is pretty reliable in that it tests all of the DNS records automatically. Thanks Hippie for putting that together. And it retries and backs off when lets for data propagation happen. So all the things that used to fail when you were running it by hand no longer fail. And the last few times I've run the script, it just plows ahead and has proceeded. So I'm feeling pretty good about automating that.
How often are we running it right now?
Not very often.
I would suggest then, I would not necessarily make this a priority, because ultimately where I would see a piece like that fitting in is inside Prow as a post submit with test grid testing, with alerts that if a push fails, that an email alert goes out, like those kind of pieces that are trivial once we get it in as a prow job. I don't think it's necessarily worth, if there isn't a lot of, if we aren't doing it very frequently, just live with the humans until the point that we've got prow up and running, and then just run it as a prow job.
URL shortener would be a much higher traffic thing to encourage people to add their own pet URLs. That's why I'm asking the question. To me, I feel like since we did the prow job for the image promoter, you could use that as prior art to do it for this as well.
Totally. That's great. That's good feedback. I don't have any firsthand experience adding prow plugins, so in my mind, it's an impossible task, but it's probably not. And while, yes, making Go part of DNS will encourage more use of it, I don't expect that we're going to have dozens and dozens of new Go short links. Like, this isn't a free-for-all. It still has to be relatively carefully curated, because we only have one level of links as far as I know. Or maybe TextDirect supports more than one level, but we're not currently doing that. So.
Yeah, so sorry for the delay, but so to speak to TextDirect, so the general idea, and also which allows for us to still do the manual thing in deploying the DNS, is the first step would be to test it out in a canary fashion, how it actually works. And then the next thing would also be, because it's priority, to self-host the open source part. So that basically would block going to production. And then we still have to figure out, I think it's in the PR, but I wasn't sure. OctoDNS, I think, automatically picks up zap zones. And I'm thinking I'm using that. So it's split into a different file for all the Go Kubernetes part, basically. So that would split out the review and still leave only the deploy, basically.
Yeah, I think that works. I'm not sure with OctoDNS if we have to create an explicit zone delegation or if it can actually merge different YAML files. But we probably want to create the explicit delegation, which tickles a memory that Google Cloud has some weirdnesses with DNS and having multiple zone delegations of the same top-level zone that we'll have to try to work out. But I agree with your earlier sentiment that basically running it ourselves would be the gate for this, and that requires the cluster.
Yeah, I think like in terms of like what are the action items, I think I commented them, or a few of them, in the specific issue. Basically, get it running on the Canary DNS with the already hosted service so that we can test it out, see if everything works as expected, how that works with the DNS and in general. And then while we do that, and while we get the general DNS idea and review process documented to basically make the human part easier, then I would, in parallel, try to get a pull request open for the Kubernetes YAMLs, basically, for the self-hosted deployment. And then we can basically just switch that over with a simple CNAME change. And that would be the first iteration, probably.
Okay.
I can live with that with the Canary space.
Yeah. Okay, Tim and Michael, I'm going to trust you guys to carry this forward. I also have to drop. So this has been super productive. I will try to ping the channel a week from today to take a look at whether or not what's on a board or a milestone accurately represents everything we talked about here. So thanks everybody for an awesome Wednesday. I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.